Let's bring in a Brit now who did 2 tours of Afghanistan, Labour Mayor of South Yorkshire and MP as well for Barnsley Central. Joining us is Dan Jarvis. Hello to you, Mr Jarvis. Thanks for joining us. Was it worth it?
Well, that's the question that many of us are asking ourselves. We invested a huge amount of sacrifice and effort in Afghanistan over 20 years, and it's been heartbreaking in recent days talking to the families who lost loved ones. 457 British soldiers lost their lives in Afghanistan, thousands more sustained injuries that have changed their lives forever. So we're all asking that question, and in the end, you have to conclude that no, it wasn't worth it. And that is heartbreaking to have to admit. I think we did make progress. I think all of those who served in Afghanistan can be extremely proud of their service. But right now, given the unfolding horrors that we're seeing in Afghanistan, it's impossible to conclude that that effort, that sacrifice that we committed over such a long time was worth it, because for most people, they just don't think that it was.
I asked the Foreign Secretary that question this morning. I asked the Defence Secretary that question yesterday. They both said that it was worth it because it provided 20 years of stability for the young population of Afghanistan. You disagree?
I don't, in all good conscience, think that you can justify the effort and the sacrifice that we committed to the country, given what's happened in recent time. It certainly is the case that real progress was made in the period of time that we were committed to the country in terms of the protection of women and girls, the number of girls who were able to engage with education, the number of women who until relatively recently were members of the Afghan parliament and serving in the judiciary. Real progress was made, but that is being unravelled as we speak and as each hour goes by. I think it's really important that we do acknowledge and continue to be proud of the service of the very brave men and women who stepped forward in our armed forces and went to Afghanistan at huge personal risk to themselves. We can be proud of that commitment. What I think we do now is redouble our efforts diplomatically. We have been engaged in that country for a long period of time. I think we should retain a commitment to Afghanistan. I think it's in our national interest to do so for the benefit of the Afghan population. But also, given the effort and the sacrifice that we've invested, I think it would be morally reprehensible and strategically naive to completely abandon the country. So I hope we'll see a stepping up of statecraft, if you like, and governments across the world, but led by the British and American governments, re-engaging, having a pragmatic position when it comes to the new administration in Afghanistan, and seeing what can be done to avert a humanitarian catastrophe, because that's what we're looking at if we don't engage and if we don't try and invest in that country, given everything that we put in over the previous generation or so.
It's easy to give the government a kicking and to say, how could they not have seen what was going to happen? But they rely on their top brass, and the Chief of the General Staff just 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, was saying that we shouldn't give up on the Afghan security services. He was very wrong.
Yes, he was. Look, no one person is accountable for the strategic failure that we've seen in Afghanistan. The most catastrophic miscalculation has taken place in recent time about the ability of the Afghan government and the Afghan national security forces to withstand the pressures that would inevitably come from the Taliban once the Americans departed. By the way, the manner of their departure left much to be desired, and from the point at which that they left the country in the dead of night, I think there was something of an inevitability that the country would fall again to the Taliban. But this is happening on the government's watch. I listened to President Biden's speech with some interest last night. I don't think history will judge kindly his handling of the situation in recent times. And what I hope we will see is an effort to engage regional partners. There's a hugely important role for Pakistan, for Iran, and for others to play in terms of seeking to mitigate the worst of a humanitarian crisis. And I think whilst clearly we're not going to be pulling military levers in the very near future to seek to affect the situation in Afghanistan, there is other influence that we can use, albeit that may be limited in terms of diplomatic and economic leverage. So I want to see a redoubling of the international efforts. I want to see the British government playing a leading role. I want to see the Prime Minister, as the chair of the G7, engaging with partner nations to look at the art of the possible. What can be done? what pressure can be applied to the Taliban regime in Kabul. That doesn't mean recognising them formally, but it is in our interest to enter into dialogue with them. We're still in the process of recovering British passport holders and other entitled personnel to safety from Afghanistan. Okay. That process will be made much easier if we've got some sort of diplomatic relationship. So that work needs to be happening right now.
How do you feel about our politicians engaging in dialogue with the Taliban, who were people that shot your friends and colleagues?
Well, of course, from a personal point of view, it is a particularly bitter pill to have to swallow, but we need to be pragmatic about it. There is a new norm now in Afghanistan, and it is in our country's national interest not to abandon the country, not to look away, but to remain engaged, to look at what diplomatic relations can be established. As I say, that doesn't mean formally recognising the new administration, but we should be having dialogue with them. We should be looking to see what humanitarian activities can be taking place now and in the near future. We've got to have some sort of working relationship. We currently have a British military operation underway to take British personnel out of Afghanistan. That will be made much easier if some kind of agreement can be reached in the short term to provide safe passage for those who want to leave the country. So I'm obviously not particularly wild about the fact that there does need to be some contact with the Taliban, given all of the difficulties we've obviously experienced with them in the past. But it is in our national interest to do so. And I hope very much that through the Foreign Office and through other channels, conversations are taking place to minimise the risks to our UK forces who are currently conducting a difficult and dangerous operation. And we're already starting to think about what activities can be put in place to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. Because if that doesn't happen, we will see very significant suffering. And it's the Afghan people and other countries in the region who will suffer as a consequence.
OK, for now, thank you.